Evo, mi ćemo počiniti sada. Dobro večer.
Good evening. We shall start now. Distinguished State Minister Osmanovic, Your Eminence Reisululay Makavazovic, Madam Prime Minister Suhotska, Mr. President Vinci, Monsignor Zovkic, Archpriest Jovanovic, Madam Vice Minister Injain, Excellencies, Professors, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored and extremely pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Austrian Embassy, the Austrian Foreign Ministry, and our very important and distinguished partners to our conference at the Ghazi Khusrev Bey Library tonight. The bilateral cultural year offers the framework for our conference and for intensive dialogue with each other. Firstly, between Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria, but in the context of the enormous challenges of our times, also to discuss important current European issues. This definitely includes religion and its role. Faith is part of both personal and social identity, relationships and anchorages. Where do I come from? Who am I and where am I going? How do I live? What purpose and meaning do I have? And what is the ultimate truth? And how can I find them? In a globalized world that is rapidly changing in terms of demography and society, these questions are being differently answered, both in terms of values and in terms of ways of life, customs, and traditions, in other words, culture. These answers, however, need to be embedded into a common and accepted system of values and rules. This leads us to the question of the making and shaping of the relationship between state and religion. This currently refers especially to Islam and its very different appearances globally in Europe and in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But this subject is broader and concerns the very fundamental question of compatibility of the concepts of this world here and the next, or other one beyond. Thereby, it appears that the differences within the monotheistic religions lay less in the actual theological guidance on how to live and their judgments, as we share the contents of the Ten Commandments, but more in the area of their translation into the forms of life. Thereby, it appears that traditions and customs are very often only apparently linked to the religious sphere, but more so to social questions, education, and the primordial human need for security. Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria have a common experience with this subject, since from 1878 until 1918, Muslims and many other religious communities were for the first time part of a big and diverse European state. The old law on Islam from 1912 and the new one of 2015 in Austria have back then, just as much as today, shown ways and suggestions how to approach these questions. It is therefore understandable that we are trying to think, discuss solution models and concepts for Europe in a broader sense. The Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina, unlike some other Islamic orientations, advocates values and positions which predominantly and for the most part align with those of the other big European religions. Among other things, the clear commitment to the separation between religion and state and the acknowledgement of the primacy of the legal order of the state, which, in other words, secularism. This also means, in the context of critical rationalism and the Enlightenment, a limited and sensible rejection of an endeavor which is inherent for religion, namely the endeavor to aim to actually enforce particular values, concepts, and truths. In contrast to this, in a modern and authentic manner, to live faith, the balancing of value hierarchies where love, peace, freedom, human dignity, and fundamental liberties are accepted as supreme religious as well as secular moral value concepts. The official Islam in Bosnia and Herzegovina, whose representatives are here with us today, and whose educational institutions partnered our event, thank you very much, can therefore be an example for Europe. Let me, to clarify, at this point, I sort of interfere with the internal affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina to claim that the above-mentioned circumstances require clearly regulated relations. Therefore, I very much hope that soon a treaty between the state and the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina will soon be concluded, as this has been done already in case of other religious communities. With today's conference, we want to contribute to interreligious and intercultural dialogue. As an important element, both Austrian and Bosnian foreign affairs policy, and according to its most recent cultural strategy in the field of culture, also of the European Union. Allow me, just before the end of my speech, to sincerely thank all the participants and to wish us all a fruitful and interesting exchange of opinions. After a video message from the Austrian Foreign Minister Sebastian Kurz, you will be addressed by Mr. Adil Osmanovic, Minister of Civil Affairs, also responsible for religious matters. On behalf of the Foreign Minister Crnadak, Mr. Šahović, Ambassador Šahović, Madam Ambassador Injine, the Austrian Vice Minister for External Affairs, Cultural Policy, and with his keynote speech, His Eminence Reisululema Kavazovic, followed by the representatives of other three big religious communities, all of whom I warmly welcome. Finally, I would like to point out that after the opening presentations of the conference, two small exhibitions will be open. One about symbols and artworks of the four monotheistic religious communities in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria, and the other one on bilateral bibliography of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria from 1876 until today. Afterwards, I would like to cordially invite you all to the reception downstairs. But before we start, I would kindly ask all of you to stand up and commemorate a great man of peace and understanding and good relations among religious communities, Mr. Shimon Peres, who passed away today. Thank you. Now, I would kindly request the video message from the Federal Minister Kurz to be displayed. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here with us today.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you all the participants to this conference in Sarajevo. This conference is a keystone of the wide-ranging program of the Austrian Cultural Year in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It addresses one of the most important issues Europe has to deal with at present, and that is how to guarantee social peace in our increasingly diverse societies. Democracy, the rule of law, and the respect for fundamental rights, such as the freedom of religion, are essential elements in this effort. Austria and Bosnia-Herzegovina both have a long and rich history. Both our countries can give examples of good practice with religions, especially with regard to Islam. Both states provide legal structures that have proven helpful for intercultural and interreligious harmony. Maybe these examples could be a model for Europe. As the European Union encourages an exchange on best practices in this important matter, I'm happy that several eminent representatives of the European Union are here at this conference. I'm confident that your conference can contribute to showing new perspectives for the possible development of an Islam with a distinct European notion. I wish you all an interesting conference.
Hvala na pažnju. Ja bih sada...
Thank you for your attention. Now, Minister Osmanovic, would you please take the floor?
Uvaženi
Distinguished Ambassador Pammer, distinguished Raisul Ulama Kavazovic, and representatives of religious communities, distinguished professors, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased and thankful for being invited to this conference. I'd like to welcome you on my own behalf and on the behalf of the Ministry of Civil Affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's an honor to be with experts who will contribute to a more profound and comprehensive discussion and deliberation of the relationship between the state and religion, with a special emphasis on the role of Islam in European context. Islam is a religion that encompasses almost 1/4 of the world population, due to the simplicity of its teachings, whereby it attracts many supporters, and due to a high demographic rate of its members. Islam is rapidly spreading. If we consider the relationship between Islam and other religions, it is crucial to bear in mind the fact that there is no force in religion, no duress, because otherwise such a faith would not be a truthful faith and would not have a purpose to it. Given that the respect of the freedom of religion is a fundamental part of Islamic teaching, Muslims in coexistence with the members of other religions have never had any problems. In the Balkans, the Ottomans, whose official religion was Islam, ruled for almost 5 centuries. Under their rule, all Christian communities existed, their churches were preserved, as well as numerous traces of spiritual and material culture. The spirit of Islam strongly influenced the establishment of the principle of tolerance in today's world. Islamic tolerance stems from the acceptance of morality as the basic principle, where integrity is the highest human virtue, rather than richness, national or ideological affiliation. Islam is not strange to Europe or its spirit. On the contrary, what we today recognize as the spirit of Europe would not have been such without the contribution of Islam in important fields of social life: religion, philosophy, art, politics, state organization, economy, natural sciences, arts, and even cookery. European cultural and civilizational heritage cannot be viewed without Islamic elements and influences. Today's Europe is home for over 20 million Muslims who are becoming an increasingly important social segment. They are a constituent part of European culture and the best bridge for dialogue understanding and cooperation between Europe and the Muslim world. However, it is worrying to see the number of people, primarily in the West, that due to ignorance observe Islam, discuss it, and write about it, primarily through the lenses of fundamentalism, terrorism, disenfranchised women, too stringent laws, and abuse of human rights, or they interpret it as a rigid system of values that threatens global peace. Therefore, we can rightly conclude that those who write and speak about Islam in that way do not know anything about it or know very little about it. The fact that Islamic belief covers the totality of human behavior and all fields of life, private, moral, spiritual, material, legal, social, economic, and educational ones. It's important to note that in addition to worship, Islam regulates the total social life, from family to business to all fields of law, to nutrition, to clothing, and personal hygiene. Essentially, Islamic thoughts include what we do, what we think, and what we feel, equally as providing an answer to the question where we come from and where we are going. Given the above, I regard that in these turbulent times, it is necessary to apply the common principles of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and be aware that there is no superiority of one man over another one, except in terms of morality. When all people in the world accept these principles and the principle of religious diversity, or when everyone realizes that there is not only one religion, but more of them, and when we start to respect and appreciate each other, we can hope to succeed, because richness is in diversity. Extreme conduct of those who claim to be members of any faith are a consequence of their ignorance, frustration, uncontrolled anger, or political rather than religious ambitions. Anyone who endorses or carries out an evil act on behalf of any religion does not actually follow any religion. They violate the principles of religion by doing so. These people are individuals with their own positions and plans. Fanatic Muslims do not represent the truthful teaching of Islam, just like fanatic Christians do not represent the truthful teachings of Christianity, and the same goes for Judaism. Ladies and gentlemen, whatever the price of policy of gentleness, tolerance, and compromise, it was and will always be the only right path for all people. Tolerance to all people, whatever their religion, is an obligation of each and every person, especially Muslims, given to them by the messenger of Islam. Let's remember, when he was the strongest, he was the most gentle. In line with that, for Muslims, to betray tolerance would mean to betray one of the basic principles of Islam. And finally, let me thank once again the organizer for inviting me to this conference, and I wish us all to work in friendly atmosphere that will result in creation of such a social environment that will be comfortable to all persons wherever they live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Now I'd like to ask distinguished Ambassador Šahović to read or to speak on behalf of Foreign Minister Crnadak, who unfortunately could not be with us here today. The floor is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished Reis al-Ulema, the representatives of the religious communities, Madam Prime Minister, Mr. Minister of Civil Affairs, dear colleagues, ambassadors, please allow me to welcome you on behalf of the Foreign Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina and to apologize because the minister couldn't be with us due to prior obligations. He has asked me to read his message to you. It is an honor for me to greet all participants of another successful conference held in the framework of the project Cultural Year Bosnia and Herzegovina, Austria 2016. The theme of today's conference, State and Religion in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria, a legal framework for Islam in the European context, is a topic that in multinational and multi-confessional societies of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria has always been important and topical. Both countries are based on the principles of a secular state with a very high degree of religious freedom. In this context, experiences that we've had throughout our history can certainly be useful in defining the relationship between the state and religion. I am convinced that today's conference will result in new ideas and findings that can be used to improve the relationship between the state and religion. Islam, as a religion in Bosnia and Herzegovina, has its place in the constitutional framework of the country, in the same way as Bosnia and Herzegovina has its place in Europe, with a certain autonomy in order to preserve its own identity and with the need for developing and improving coexistence with others and those who are different. In this context, I consider that the legal framework for Islam or any other religion in Bosnia and Herzegovina and experiences of the secular state's relations with religions that enjoy broad freedoms in Bosnia and Herzegovina can certainly be an example of functional relationship between state and religion. Thank you very much.
Teresa Injan to address us. Mrs. Ambassador Teresa Injan is heading our General Directorate for Foreign Cultural Policy and is somebody who has started to love Bosnia and Herzegovina, and she's the first time here in Sarajevo, so I would like to warmly welcome you and wish you a nice stay, and I may express my hope that you will come again and support all the activities we have together with our Bosnian and Herzegovinian friends as Austrian Embassy. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Distinguished Minister Osmanovic, distinguished representatives of religions, Madam Prime Minister, Excellencies, Professors, ladies and gentlemen, it is with particular honor and pleasure that on behalf of Austria, I welcome this distinguished audience to this important international conference. We are delighted this convention is being held at the historic and magnificently restored premises of the Venerable Gazi Husrev Bey Library. We could not have found a more suitable and inspiring venue for an event that surely represents a highlight of the cultural year Bosnia and Herzegovina, Austria in 2016. In the course of this cultural year, we have had ample opportunity to further deepen knowledge and understanding between our two countries. Political meetings and the manifold economic contacts stand for the profound quality of our bilateral relations. But it is especially through intellectual and cultural encounters that experiences can be shared between the peoples of our countries that strengthen the foundation for future cooperation well beyond the cultural year. Gathering here today in Sarajevo to reflect and discuss a legal framework for Islam in European context, we should not start without referring to Smile Balic. 10 years ago, the universities of Sarajevo and Vienna held an international symposium on Smile Balic as a visionary of Islam in Europe. Born in Bosnia and Herzegovina and head of the Arabic manuscript department at the Austrian National Library for many years, this Austrian Orientalist is considered a bridge builder who preserved the knowledge of the specific Bosnian contribution to Islam in Europe. More than ever, profound and reliable intellectual traditions are required, as we are facing major challenges, not only in our two countries, but all over Europe. We need to foster social cohesion, inclusion, and peaceful coexistence in our increasingly diverse societies. We need to make sure the rule of law and the respect for fundamental rights, such as the freedom of religion and belief, are safeguarded. And we most certainly need to counteract oppression and violence in the name of religion. Faith and religion are on the one hand most personal, intimate, private matters. They have to do with our hopes and fears, with desires and values. They need to be protected. They need sheltered spaces to be cultivated and expressed and reflected. On the other hand, we have to take a determined stance against radicalization and abuse of religion for repressive purposes. Both Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria provide constitutional and legal structures that have proven helpful for intercultural and interreligious harmony in our respective societies. Both countries, and it was mentioned already, share a long history of separation of church and state, while maintaining equally good relations with all religions. In Austria, we consider education to be an essential aspect when it comes to connecting religions with the requirements of a modern, pluralistic society. Time and again, religion needs to be consistently reflected upon. This is why in Austria, the curriculum for the training of all religious teachers explicitly foresees an interreligious element. Moreover, the Austrian Islam Law 2015 provides for the establishment of a department for Islamic theology at the University of Vienna. Tomorrow, we will hear a great many examples of good practices on the day-to-day questions of religious observance and the secular state. I look forward to lively discussions and fruitful exchanges between the many renowned academics and experts participating in various panels. Thank you all for coming and for your esteemed contribution to these important questions. I'm especially pleased about the participation of representatives of the European institutions. Allow me to particularly thank Her Excellency Professor Dr. Hanna Suchocka, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Poland and Honorary President of the Venice Commission at the Council of Europe, for being here. And Mr. David Friggeri, the recently appointed European Commission Coordinator on combating anti-Muslim hatred. It seems timely and reasonable to connect the experiences of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria with initiatives on the European level. With the appointment of a coordinator on anti-Muslim hatred and the first fundamental rights colloquium a year ago, the European Union set a strong political sign about its priorities in this regard. That is to talk about cultural and religious diversity, the role of intercultural and interreligious dialogue, and to encourage an exchange on best practices of national strategies. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by thanking our partners here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, whose support and substantial contribution helped to realize this project. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Civil Affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina Minister Osmanovic is here with us tonight. The Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have the distinct pleasure to hear Raisul Ulema Kazavazovic's key address in a minute. The Austrian Cultural Association, represented by Ambassador Christian Prosel and his regional representative Kamala Sertovic, and the Austrian Embassy in Sarajevo under the most able leadership of Ambassador Martin Pammer. My gratitude goes to the Austrian Future Fund for generously sponsoring this conference. Finally, I wish to extend my heartfelt thanks to all those who thoroughly prepared this conference and created the appealing atmosphere in which we find ourselves here tonight. I wish you all a very good evening with stimulating thoughts and conversation, inspiring encounters, and a very productive conference tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ambassador. I must confess, every time you deliver a speech, I'm touched. Eminencio, gospodine.
Your Eminence, Raisul Ulema, you are a host here. I would like to ask you now to take the floor and to deliver your keynote speech. Thank you very much.
Poštovani
distinguished representatives of religious communities, Mr. Zovkic, Mr. Jovanovic, distinguished ambassador of the Republic of Austria, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and may the peace of God be upon us. I would like to welcome you, convinced that the general significance and specific importance of this conference can hardly be overestimated. Not so long ago, in the sciences dealing with religion from a secular perspective, there prevailed the opinion on irrevocable disappearance of religion from public life. For more than 2 centuries, promoters of modernization have taken it for granted that science, technology, urbanization, and education would eventually, under quotation marks, disenchant the charmed world of believers, the end of quote, and that the people would, with time, either abandon their traditional faith or at least transform it. They have pointed to continental Europe, where belief in God has been in steady decline over the last 50 years, and claimed that with time, Muslims everywhere would undergo a similar transformation. Now we know that this is not the case. Moreover, we know that the process of decreasing public presence of religion has not only been stopped, but that it took a reverse direction in the last decades of the previous century. In the circles of scholars and thinkers occupied with religion, the return of religion into the social life is now being mentioned as one of the most important phenomena in today's world. This return to religion happened in all religions, but with different intensities, with various intensities, and manifested in different forms. The religious revival in most religions was reflected in the spreading of religious rituals and mass observance of religious ceremonies and representing religious views and positions in public debates. In parallel with that, the launching of religion-inspired social initiatives and activities came about, as well as the emergence of movements and groups invoking religion in order to legitimize various political goals and interests. On this occasion, we cannot examine which of these have an authentic foundation in religion and which are the consequences of interest-based utilization of the growing social importance of religion. The fact is that religion has become the focus of interest and that most media and political attention is focused on the manifestation of faith outside the institutional forms of religious life and in secular areas of social life. At the same time, limits have been shown in the current legal definitions of the position of religion and individual and collective rights of believers in developed societies. It is apparent nowadays that legal regulation of the relationship between state and religious communities fails to fully address the challenges of an increased social presence of religion and believers' need to publicly express it. We believe that it should be generally understood that among the answers to questions and challenges posed by the return of religion in general and individual religions in particular, the most important ones are legal response and legal solutions and provisions. The presence of Islam and Muslims in Europe has sparked much interest in recent decades. Putting the results of such interest in general perspective, we can agree with the insights of a researcher who has said that Muslims are both clearly present in a secular Europe and yet, in an important sense, absent from it. He has pointed out in particular the unease expressed by the majority of the inhabitants of Western Europe about the presence of Muslim communities and Islamic traditions there, about the inability of Muslim immigrants in the majority of European nation states to be properly represented, and about the presence of differences in the way secular Europeans evaluate the political significance of, quote, religious symbols, unquote, in public sphere. To add to his insight, let us recall strange, not to say discriminatory, laws concerning Islam and Muslims recently passed in some European countries. Accommodation and mutual respect can be helpful, as well as clear rules governing areas of possible tension. For instance, areas pertaining to the status of women, parental rights over their children, speech offensive to religious feelings of others, or speech inciting violence, standards of dress in public institutions, and the like. Western countries have adopted different strategies. Some introduce a ban on wearing religious symbols at schools, others permit them. But what we have to understand now is that the issue of how to cope with these problems, rather than how to defend high principles, is presently on the agenda. That is why our Muslim unease comes from the fact that these countries belong to a group of countries that are traditionally regarded as models for the rule of laws which ensure the highest standards of human rights. The Republic of Austria, of course, is not one of these countries. It rather belongs to a group of exemplary countries ruled by law. The presence of Islam and Muslims in the Republic of Austria differs from their presence in most European countries, Western European countries. It differs in the duration and their presence, and notably in its legal recognition and regulation. There's a reference that groups of Hungarian Muslims lived in areas ruled by Habsburgs and the law on recognition of churches or religion passed as far back as 1874 recognized Islam as one of the religions of the Austrian Empire. When the Congress of Berlin approved the occupation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1878, the Habsburgs took power over land with majority Bosniak Muslim population, which was religious-wise integrated into the religious and legal system of the Ottoman Empire. It was a system that, with the Sultan as a caliph, represented the authentic Islam tradition and the Ummah, a universal community of Muslims. The Ottoman sovereign transferred the religious prerogatives of the caliph onto the Mufti of Istanbul, who carried the title of Shaykhul Islam from the beginning of the 15th century. Based on the principle of the transfer of authority for the interpretation of Islamic norms and administration of religious affairs, Sheikhul Islam delegated his powers to provincial muftis. Following the Ottoman occupation of Bosnia in the 15th century, the normative and institutional framework of the religious system of the Ottoman Empire witnessed a mass conversion of Bosnian population to Islam. By accepting Islam, they adopted the doctrine of Islam and religious practices, introduced their profession of faith into the normative system of a regulated religious manifestation, and became participants in the development of a stable Bosnian structure of Islamic life. The duties of Imam, Khatib, Mudarris, and Mufti were the main functions in this traditional system of Islamic institutions and Muslim or Islamic religious and organizational structure. From quite early on, these duties were assumed and fully performed by Bosniak religious scholars, alims, educated at Bosnian madrasas, Quran schools, and Ottoman Islamic universities. After the establishment of the Austro-Hungarian rule in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Muslim Religious Authority, Islamic Council of Elders, linked to the Office of the Sheikhul Islam in Istanbul, and the institution of caliphate was instituted in Sarajevo. The authority with Reisul Ulema and 4 members of Ulema Majlis were appointed in 1882 by Emperor Franz Joseph. The organization of Islamic community in the new state and legal system maintained the continuity of authentic religious tradition of Islam and respect for the supreme religious authority in Istanbul. This was institutionally guaranteed by the Menshura, the solemn letter of credentials which the Sheikhul Islam, having the authority of Caliph, issued to Reisul Ulema, whereby delegating him the powers of the religious authority as well as the right and duty to authorize khatibs for the proper interpretation of faith and religious rules. Following the abolition of the caliphate, the powers of the office of Sheikhul Islam in Istanbul were transferred on a representative body in Sarajevo, the Council or Assembly of Islamic Community, in an enlarged session, which elects the Reisul Ulema and hands over the Menshura, the letter of credentials, to him, and on the Reisul Ulema, who issues Marasalahs, the documents of authorization, to imams, khatibs, and mudarrises. The Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina was administratively constituted at the beginning of the Austro-Hungarian rule. However, in fundamental religious sense, in terms of institutional structure, it has existed for centuries as an organized religious community and a regulated system of religious life of Bosnian Muslims. One can say that it was legally confirmed by the Statute for Self-Governing or Autonomous Administration of Islamic Religious and Waqf Ma'arif activities in Bosnia and Herzegovina of 1909. The statute prescribes the respect for religious values, norms, and institutions of Islam and guarantees institutional representation and protection to the Islamic community. The Islam law of 1912 was essentially passed for the benefit of Bosniak subjects of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, recognizing the Muslim community of the Hanafi school. During the Austro-Hungarian rule, Bosniaks became aware of their traditional Muslim and Bosnian specificity, but also of the new civilizational reality and tradition of the modern Europe defining them. The most prominent Bosniak intellectuals expressed this awareness of possible encounters and links between the values of Islam and the legacy of the modern European civilization. They saw the possibilities for a fruitful encounter primarily in the adoption of scientific achievements of the West by Muslims based on authentic Islamic recognition of the value of knowledge, but also in linking the Islamic value of justice and modern European political institutions represented by Austria-Hungary. According to official records, about 600,000 Muslims presently live in Austria. They are mostly of Bosnian, Herzegovinian, or Turkish origin. Their religious life, just like that of their ancestors in Austria, is regulated by the law on Islam, which has been enforced for over a century. Over the past 3 years, a new law was being drafted, since it was found that the old one was no longer in line with the demands of the present time. The proponent of the new law on Islam is Austrian Federal Minister for Europe, Integration and Foreign Affairs, Sebastian Kurz. He explained that his initiative was based on the wish to ensure by the new law that Islam, for which he said was part of Europe, should be freed from control from abroad and be given a chance to develop freely and independently within Austrian society and take root there in line with common European values. The minister's initiative was received by the Islamic community with great interest and respect for the importance of the new legal definition of the position of Islam and Muslims in the Republic of Austria. We have in mind the importance of the new law for Muslims and for Austrian society in general, as well as its broader significance and potential, given the profound historical experience with Islam and Muslims in Austria. It was our duty to protect the religious propriety of Imam's work in Bosniak Jamaats, which, without the Murasela credentials issued by the Reisul Ulema, lacks the religious foundation of Islamic education and the authentic religious character of property in Bosniak Jamaats in Austria. But it was also understandable for us that by passing the new law on Islam, Austria wanted to additionally protect itself with regards to security. By supporting it, we wanted to give our contribution, and that is why we endeavored to contribute to the implementation of this law in a useful manner, not only for the sake of ensuring the rights of the members of Islamic community of Bosniaks in Austria, which is part of the Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and which together with other Muslim communities forms part of the Islamic religious community in Austria. We believed, and we still believe, that the cooperation between the state authorities of Austria and the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina can lead to the creation of a credible European model for the regulation of the position of Islam and Muslims in the Western European countries. The Republic of Austria has the necessary historical, cultural, and legislative experience gained for the most part owing to Bosnian Muslims, which includes good cooperation and the joint approach with the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Islamic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina is self-standing, and its decisions do not depend on some state policy or politics, as is the case with some other Muslim groups in the world. And finally, I will conclude my address. It appears that the dominant ways in which religion is politically and scientifically treated fail to offer satisfactory answers to the question raised by the return of religion in general and individual religions in particular in public life. Being aware of that, a number of Muslim thinkers around the world started promoting a so-called liberal Islam. However, it is evident that the more quote-unquote adapted or adjusted Islam met the demands of the moment, the fewer reasons it gave the faithful to stick to it in hard times rather than to the faith of self-proclaimed guardians of religious purity, offering a much more radical salvation. Therefore, it remains for us to ask ourselves whether the adapted or adjusted Islam is the only option, or whether political theology of Islam can be transformed in yet another way by renewing the traditional political theology from within. Bosnian Muslims, personified by Reisul Ulema Tevfik Azabagic, had long ago offered reasonable arguments why Muslims should be loyal citizens of the state they live in. He did this not by using the apologetic language of tolerance and progress, but by offering the language of Muslim political theology, asking Muslims to be loyal to the state, which ensured them the profession of faith, development of community, and preservation of their identity. Austro-Hungarian monarchy accepted it back then, and it seems that the Republic of Austria and Bosnia and Herzegovina, within their Muslims and their Islamic community, could now offer Europe a possible alternative. And today, voices from Bosnia and Herzegovina, the leading Bosnian Herzegovinian theologians, are calling for that very kind of renewal of Islamic political teleology. I hope and expect that this conference will contribute to paving the way toward a model for developing Islam with European characteristics and features, a model acceptable and open to diversity among European countries. I wish you a successful conference and thank you for listening.
Hvala vam puno.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It was a very interesting speech and enlightening when it comes to the common history of our two countries. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Finzi, President of the Jewish community.
In Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he has been here all the last 20, 30 years, especially at the time of siege, as all here present. And it is our pleasure to listen to you, President Finzi. You are also a personality who is very much known in the cultural life of Sarajevo and a very much requested speaker. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Ваша Eminencio,
Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Shalom, Salam, peace be with you. All of these words mean the same and only sound different, but this is what keeps us in this world, and that is peace and believing in peace. I don't know why am I called upon to ask first. Our tradition is to hear first the Islamic community, then the Serbian Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, and only then the Jewish community. But perhaps bearing in mind my advanced age and the fact that we are to celebrate a new Jewish year, 5772nd, maybe that's the reason why. Well, thank you very much, Your Excellency, for everything you've said here. I've spent almost all of my 70 years here, not just the last 30, but from the point of view of the Jewish community, I dare say this topic is very interesting, but it is a topic that perhaps Austria could learn more from the Bosnian example than we could learn from the European example of treating Islam and religious communities in general. It is clear that we live in a very turbulent world, that we are all in a perpetual crisis, constant tensions, fear of tomorrow. Unfortunately, this is the case in our country as well. Even though it's a very small country, we have a lot of divided interests, and many are trying to poke a hole in the boat that we are all sitting in, not understanding that we would all sink. And certainly we would not just hurt others by doing that, but ourselves as well. I dare say that religious communities and churches in our country are really trying to overcome that situation. Within our Interreligious Council, we've managed to establish an honest, deep interreligious dialogue where we do not try to compete who's better, but rather trying to help each other and to help all the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina by extension. I do believe that the conclusions of this conference and all the discussions here will be fruitful. And because of that, I wish you all a pleasant stay in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially those who came from abroad. We, as the Interreligious Council, made sure that the weather is nice, and you please make sure that we all have very fruitful discussions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Mr. Finzi. I didn't want to imply that you were not here. I just tried to imagine the last 20 years, 30 years. It's a protocol, and it's really my error, so I apologize. I will pay more attention to that in the future. Now I'd like to ask Monsignor Matozovkic to take the floor, representing the Roman Catholic Church, to which I also belong. Distinguished Reis Effendi, representatives of Austrian political and academic institutions, dear co-citizens. As a delegate of Cardinal Vinko Puljic, the Archbishop of Bosnia and the President of the Bishops' Conference in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I'd like to greet the organizers of this international conference, where we will be discussing state and religions in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Austria, a legal framework for Islam in a European context. I am proud and happy to point out that I've cooperated with the Archbishop when the Interreligious Council was established in 1997. At the time, I heard many times how the political and religious leaders of the Bosnian Muslims are saying, I am a Muslim and I am a European, and both are important to me. When asked by my Christian friends and acquaintances from European countries if I was afraid of the Muslims in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I answer that I am not afraid, because the religious and political leaders see, together with us, Catholics, a secure future in joining Europe without dreaming of a Sharia state. We, the Catholics who were born here and who want to live responsibly in this country without discrimination or privileges, have had a long experience of living with others. In our history, the 40 years of Austrian rule in Bosnia and Herzegovina is the most precious to us, because that government, with their European experience, has helped us build numerous churches, monasteries, Catholic schools, and institutions. Without our Muslim, Orthodox, Christian, and Jewish neighbors being forced to leave the country because of the officially Catholic rule. That experience of sharing mutual successes, but also tragedies with others, has taught us good neighborly relations, regardless of who governs us. We, the Catholics, are now disappointed by the consequences of the Dayton Peace Agreement, because the majority Catholics expelled from the dioceses of Banja Luka and Sarajevo have not been able to return to the parishes of their origin. We hope that by joining Europe, some of these consequences of this bad peace treaty would be resolved. During the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church opted for dialogue with Christians of other denominations, then with the Jews as the people of Jesus, and with the Muslims. We have tried to implement in all circumstances what the Council has outlined and what we have been encouraged to do so by the popes. And I'd like to point out that the Polish Pope, John Paul II, visited our country in 1997 and 2003, and the Argentinian Pope, Francis, visited us in 2015. I'd like to greet the organizers and participants once more, and I wish you all a successful conference. Monsignor, thank you very much for your opening address. Now I'd like to ask the representative of the Christian Orthodox Church in Bosnia and Herzegovina in Sarajevo, the Protopresbyter Stavrofor, and the Sarajevo parish priest, and my dear friend, Vanja Jovanovic. Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, distinguished representatives of churches and religious communities, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Christian Orthodox Church, Serbian Orthodox Church that I represent here tonight. When we talk about religion, and in accordance with our topic here today, we mean a system in which the believers gathered in common faith and religious service live their way towards God, in God and with God. Those believers are also part of a certain society, a state, an organized system, which has the need and must legally define religion within its own system. In the simplest sense, we speak of the encounter between state and religion within the human being who is a citizen and a believer. That relationship, by nature, is always good and complementary, or it should be such. The state and the religion need to have a synergetic relationship that is only natural, which means that neither should interfere in the other's competencies, but rather that they should complement each other. Of course, I speak from the perspective of a Christian, and based on the experiences and the fruits of the Western, or in our context, the European achievements when it comes to rights and liberties. It is true that mostly at conferences that discuss such topics talk about Europe or the USA. I would personally like to hear a little bit about the rest of the world. My experiences when I stayed in the Middle East within the Jerusalem parish, and which covers also the territories of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and the Emirates, Qatar, are very different. Now let's go back to Europe and legislation. Europe has various approaches, from a complete separation between state and religion to a very familiar relationship. The religions, on the other hand, have their own positions and principles that emerge from their teachings, from an absolute exclusive orientation towards God to a perception that the earthly societal order is important in the process of achieving the ultimate state of eternal existence in the future. In order for this to bear good quality fruit, honesty is necessary on both sides, based on which constructive and concrete steps could be realized. Thus, each religion must present itself and determine what is the basis for a common functioning with all the others, states and religions. Likewise, no one should interfere in the teachings of the other and those who are different. Everyone must have freedom. There are boundaries to freedom, and this is the freedom of others and those who are different. If I understand my freedom to the detriment of others and those who are different, then we will all have problems, the state and those who are different. Regarding us in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we've defined our status through the law on the freedom of churches and religious communities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Since I've been personally involved in the project for many years, I can only say that I'm very proud of it. And there are reasons to be proud. First of all of us, different representatives of the churches and religious communities here, have searched for and finally found a common basis for a definition within our existence of this state. Considering the period of the socialist revolution, where churches were not defined as churches, but as religious communities, and there's a huge difference between the two. Those who were the servants of the church were by law recognized as performing artists, even though they tell us that we are still such. But we still have made a big step forward by drafting this. When we were drafting this law, we invited experts from Europe and the United States. And then we realized that the examples of legal solutions were so different that we could copy a model that would suit us. In our frequent meetings that took a long time, we drafted it ourselves, respecting all the freedoms and fundamental human rights that we think do originate from our teachings. Maybe this is not the most perfect law, but it is certainly a most ideal one in the post-war Bosnia and Herzegovina. The situation in Austria, especially with regards to the Islamic religious community, as is the topic of this conference, we will be hearing at this conference. I wish you all the best from God, a constructive conference and very fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your speech. After this serious part, the opening of our conference, I have two tasks. First, I'd like to thank you for your attention and interest, and of course, to thank all those present, the guests and important people, professors, ambassadors, representatives of religious communities, especially Raisul Ulema and all others. And the second task is to invite you downstairs at the ground floor. There will be a reception. We will after having spiritual food, now we will get some physical food, something to eat. And allow me to explain to you something about the two exhibitions at the ground floor.
Representatives of the religious communities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Raisul Ulema, President Finci, Parish Vanya, Monsignore Zovko, dear participants from abroad, from Austria, from wherever you come, thank you very much for your attention. And as we have got now some food for our souls and thoughts, we will now get some food for our terrestrial needs, for our bodies. But before that, I would kindly invite you and ask you to join us in the downstairs, the lower floor, where I will address you very briefly about the two small exhibitions which we have prepared. Actually, one about religious symbols and books and things which are used in religions from all four religions. And the second, a little bit bigger exhibition are books. Maybe you may ask yourselves why, but you will hear that downstairs. Thank you very much. Hvala vam puno. I nadam se da ćemo se vidjeti.
Thank you very much. I hope to see you all tomorrow.